My name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. I am surprised at how fast I read this one. So today we are reviewing The Nexus Games by Shami Stovall. Yes, it's another Shami Stovall series because 2 just wasn't enough for this channel. We need 3. And this one is a little bit more up my alley. It is a LitRPG. Now, if you're unsure what that is, a LitRPG is all about basically your normal RPG mechanics, either in video games or in tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, put into a book world. Therefore, it is a very hard magic system. Now, it can kind of come and go as to the level of how much those numbers are at the forefront of the characters' minds in the story. This one, very forefront. It's basically playing out like a video game with some Dungeons and Dragons mechanics. But let's explain why. So this is all about a Special Marines soldier named Kellen who is on forced medical leave, getting pulled in to what is called the Nexus. The Nexus is this really trippy, parallel dimension place where all of these different dimensions layer on top of each other and it blends to make this weird disjointed world. And because some of these worlds in this mini parallel universes have, in essence, magic that runs on numbers, aka video game mechanics, the Nexus does as well. And so there is this mystical higher being called the Arbiter who runs the Nexus Games, which, as you can probably guess, are very, very deadly games that every outsider is forced to compete in. If you do not compete, you are eliminated. Not exactly sure that's how to get participation, but Kellen is pulled in along with his possible love interest Mavis, and they are part of this ragtag team. And if they beat the games, they get access to what is known as the Zenith, this kind of mystical other world that can break all hexes and break all curses and apparently holds all the answers to everything. And that's pretty much the only way they're going to get back home. Once you have been transported to the Nexus, you really can't go back. And there's a lot of secrets as to why Kellen was sought out specifically for these games. Both are other characters that are kind of running the show, so to speak, have ulterior motives, Shang and Sen, and you find out why. And I'm not gonna lie, that I was not expecting that. But there was some nice twists and turns. Now, this book is very gory. Right off the bat, you're gonna have to deal with the tyranny worms. So if you got a bug thing, it's basically a way to explain away video game mechanics. How are they able to jump from high places or heal back at like a bit per minute? And essentially how it works is they have worms under their skin and it heals them, healing worms. So it's not, as you get into this story, he doesn't see them as often, but at the beginning when it first becomes a thing, it's like, but okay. That took a second to get used to. And more often, what you'll be distracted by are all the numbers and all of the mechanics, because the book will bring up like Kellen's full character sheets with stats and abilities and such, or there'll be moments where he's basically like pulling up like in front of his eyes, like the hood on a video game, except his real life eyes, all of these lists of abilities that he can unlock. And I swear I felt like I was looking at one of my D&D's character sheets just to read that. And the downside of that is that he'll think to himself, oh, I wonder what my stat is in this, or what my health is, or whatever. But the entire sheet will get pulled up again on the page, or he'll be wondering about his abilities and an entire ability list will get pulled up. And that kind of stuff was a little bit annoying to try and read through, just because it was so much mechanics. Like, it wasn't even like just straight up world building, it was also mechanics. But I did appreciate how much this book made lit RPGs as accessible as they're probably gonna get. It's kind of an inherently learning curve of a genre. I didn't have too much problem with it, but I already play video games and do tabletop RPGs, so I'm already like to a certain level aware of basic mechanics, and switching out the numbers and switching out the names of spells once you would know them doesn't really do much. But I did like how it referenced specific video game mechanics without referencing like those specific video games. Like there were things like characters drop quote unquote loop or arcana to level up. It's basically XP. Or in a game, they have both games actually in this book, they have like a shrinking net that gets closer and closer, like any battle royale game, but it never name drops anything specifically. Neither Kellen nor Mavis from our world are really gamers, so they're not like name dropping references. You don't need to know any specific game to understand the references here, but it is very much an homage to that kind of game mechanics. There's also an homage to how people act within video games, which this book is not the first one to do this. Undertale, for example, is a very famous example of a game that worked to show just how much people tend to resort to violence a lot in video games. In that game, the only real ending, the only way to get to the true ending of the game was through a pacifist run where you don't kill anyone. And in this book, we have NPCs, essentially. They're not called that, but they're referred to as Nexus residents, and they are very, they have a lot of birth defects, tumors. There's a lot of references to them being inbred, and a lot of the outsiders that come in for these games will just slaughter them mercilessly for the XP, and a very clear reference to how gamers will act around NPCs in games, just killing them to level up, even when there's no call in the universe of the game to do that. And I really like that that was called out. And without getting into too much detail, there's also a kind of mechanic in the game where there is a benefit to being pacifistic. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't an exact replica of, say, an Undertale, but I like that it was brought up like that. Like, saving the little sisters in BioShock, like that kind of stuff where it's short-term ups the difficulty for Kellen, but in the long term actually provides more like abilities or more interesting abilities or unlock secrets that other people don't know. There's also a very standard evil team of people who have evil motives, and if they reach the zenith, bad things happen that they have to stop. But I do need to note that this book comes with a giant trigger warning beyond all the gore and the death, which I guess for me, I figure you could kind of expect that. Like, it's a death game. Like, you'd kind of expect some gore. But there is a character, and I wasn't expecting this, that is making constant suicide ideation jokes. And at first I thought it was just a one-off, and then it becomes like a clear facet of his character. His name is Bitso. He's a kind of like theatrical news anchor and almost at certain points like ring announcer or ringmaster type character with fancy suits, manacles on his wrists at times, and a bloody blindfold, implying that something's very screwed up and wrong with his eyes. And he makes references to the sweet release of death and all this kind of stuff constantly, and then even goes so far as to ask the protagonist to kill him if they ever see each other out and about on the field. Now, you don't really get a resolution to this in this book, but the protagonist does point out that that's effed up, that's not right. So it's not necessarily romanticized, but it does kind of come out of nowhere. And I figure to a certain extent, a lot of the references could probably be cut out. It does seem a little bit over the top at times, and just be aware of that. I don't know to what extent all of the jokes and quips and theatricality of it mirror actual suicide ideation, but just be prepared going into it. And I'm really hoping that that sub arc will see some kind of resolution that doesn't make me feel validated in my extreme hesitation about it. Now, the ending. Shami Stovall endings are always something big and gigantic, and this one was no different. You do not see the end of all the games. There are 10 of them. There are only 2 in this specific book. They're all properly big and dramatic, though, as you would expect of, death games. But I did enjoy the one section near the very end where, without giving anything away, obviously, Kellen is playing a very dangerous game of trickery, and there's that, level tension the entire time that if he screws up and the deception is revealed at any second, he's dead. And it made for a very, very nice tense moment, but it also gave him a lot more information because, deception and scouting things out. But I really, really liked that. There was one big thing that I'm really nervous about because they didn't specifically say that one character is fine at the end. So I'm a little nervous. But regardless, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. The only reason I didn't go for a full 5 is, yes, all that mechanics and the world building can get to be a bit much, especially for the first book in a series. Shami Stovall is no stranger to giant books with a lot of world building, but in the Frith Chronicles, it didn't really happen until book 3, which also that book had a giant tournament, although that one wasn't to the death. But if we're talking the Frith Chronicles, I see you, Miss Stovall. I see you plagiarizing it yourself. Oh yeah, Kellen, let's give him some shadow powers and a shadow armor that covers him up out of nowhere and let him step through the shadows. I swear, if this armor starts talking, I'm gonna lose it. I get it. Once you've developed the perfect grasp of a magic system in one book and you know exactly how to have a protagonist fight in that book, of course you'll translate it into another one. But if that shows up in Starmark, I'm telling everybody. But regardless, I did enjoy it. Like I mentioned before, this is about as accessible as a lit RPG is probably gonna get because there's no direct references and it does explain it to someone that is not a gamer, so it is explaining it as if it is explaining it to someone who has never done any of that kind of stuff before. But again, it's still a lit RPG and that's still kind of a tough genre to get into if you aren't already aware of a lot of those mechanics. But if you are looking to get into the genre itself, this one would be a great pick. Now, if you are an indie author and you would like a review like this one, please let me know. I will have all that information down in the description below. Please be sure to read through that review policy. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.